Welcome to our Trentham World War I guided walk. My name is Alina.
And this is Megan. We are aiming to show you what Trentham was like 100 years ago. The buildings, the people who lived and worked here, and something of their lives. 100 years ago, Trentham was still much an estate village. The Leveson Gower family, who became Dukes of Sutherland, have been here since the 1540s. The Duke was still the main landowner and employer, although the family moved away in about 1905. Trentham Hall was offered to local councils, but the offer was declined and the hall was demolished in 1911 to 12. This part of the estate was auctioned off in 1919.
This period 100 years ago was therefore a time of great change and an uncertainty for the people of Trentham. Not only was the country at war, but they were facing loss of employment and possibly even their homes. The entrance to the estate yard is over a bridge, originally a drawbridge over a moat. The tall building to the left was the estate office. Inside were stables and coach houses. There was a lodge to the right, with windows allowing observance of all goods in and out of the yard. Behind was a drinking fountain with 3 cups. Bread and beer were supplied to travellers when the Sutherlands were in residence, but the practice was stopped as people were throwing food into the stream while drinking the beer.
The family used the grand west entrance to the house, the remains of which can still be seen in Trentham Park. This entrance was used by the public, who much enjoyed a day out at Trentham Gardens, including skating on the lake in winter. During World War I, the park was used for army training in trench making, bryant exercise and bomb practice, also grazing for army horses. The brook here is called Park Brook and it flows into the Trent at the medieval bridge, which is our next stopping point. These derelict remains are all that is left of 4 ornamental brick and tile cottages built in 1842. They were possibly one of the first commissions of Charles Barry, who was then working on the new hall. One of the cottages was used as a girls' and infant school in the 1860s. The cottages were abandoned about 1980.
We have a good view of the rear of the poultry house, which we shall see again at the end of our walk. It had extensive gardens and there were fish stews where the church car park is now. Note the small lodge near the river which seems to have used for rearing fowl.
A 100 years ago, this was a private road used by the Sutherlands to take the deceased to the mausoleum opposite. It later became the main public entrance to the gardens. The lodges and gates were moved here from the west entrance in the 1930s.
Over the road, behind the yew trees, is the Sutherland Mausoleum, which is the only Grade 1 listed building in Stoke-on-Trent. It is open today for Heritage Open Day, and you can visit it later.
Trentham World War I project began with the War Memorial. In 2014, we decided to research the names of the 17 men inscribed on the memorial, and that led us on to find out more about their lives. The memorial cross was unveiled 2nd of October 1921. The inscription reads, "In grateful memory of the men of Trentham who fell in the Great War," and lists 16 names, plus one who died at a later date. The dedication is an unusual one, which reads, "This memorial cross is a gift of the women of Trentham. We were intrigued to find out more about the women, and this research is continuing."
All the buildings along the next stretch of the Stone Road were demolished as part of a road widening in the 1960s. We shall learn more of them at our next stop.
100 years ago, this was the home of retired huntsman William Boxall. Will Boxall began riding as a youngster at Newmarket. In 1873, riding for Mr. Henry Chaplin, he came second at the Liverpool Grand National, and on the same horse he won the Sefton Cup steeplechase the next day. Mr. Chaplin was son-in-law to the Duke of Sutherland, married to his daughter Florence. In 1914, Trentham Estate Note refers to Boxall as the stud groom in charge of Canadian remounts, i.e. horses which were brought over from Canada to be trained as army horses before being sent over to France. The cottage later became Café Monica, for which we have a photograph, and then the Poacher's Cottage.
There are two more cottages behind the Poachers, Rose Cottage and Pear Tree Cottage, which was the home of Frederick Johnson, a blacksmith who worked on the estate.
Yew Tree Cottage was the home of William and Sarah Jones. Both served the Sutherland family, William for over 50 years under 3 dukes. They had occupied Yew Tree Cottage since their marriage on 2nd of June 1852. Their diamond wedding celebration in 1912 was reported in the Sentinel.
Cranberry Cottage was designed in 1850 by Charles Barry with his basement intended for a post office. By 1911, it was occupied by the sub-postmaster James Calvert, assisted by his wife Sarah. Their son, Kendall Calvert, joined the Royal Navy in 1908 and served on a variety of ships until 1924. James Calvert was a cousin of Frank Harris, the postman who stars in our film Letters to Hemheath. After World War I, the post office moved down to a house on Longton Road.
Sadly, the buildings which used to be here were demolished in the 1960s, but they were much photographed, so we can see what this part of the village looks like in 1916.
The schoolmaster's house was just this side of the Priory entrance. The house was home to Cloud Raymond Force, killed in military action in 1918. His wife Margaret was also a teacher who died in 1973, aged 93. 2 new houses occupy this site.
A boys' school was first opened in Trentham in 1674. A girls' school was established by the Duchess of Sutherland before 1840. The building shown in the photo, built by order of the Duke, was opened in 1877. In 1916, there were 236 pupils, boys and girls headmaster, Mr. Force, reported in 1912 that 3 new subjects had been added to the curriculum: beekeeping, poultry keeping and woodwork, practical subjects which were used as a foundation for other schoolwork. In the 1960s, the school was no longer adequate for the increased population. It was closed in 1962 and demolished in 1965.
The 4th Duke of Sutherland gifted the Institute, opened in 1894, which was aimed at the educational improvement of the villagers. It had a billiard room, a stocked library, reading and classrooms, a kitchen, a workshop for handicrafts, and a refreshment bar. By 1921, the refreshment room had become something of a liability. Droves of pottery holidaymakers used the Institute as a catering establishment when they visited the park. It was reported that the unruly mob do a certain amount of mischief and leave behind them a terrible mess. The villagers have become somewhat chary of using the Institute for parish gatherings. The next building housed the North Staffordshire Hunt Stables on the site of the old Trentham Inn. Since 1862, the Hunt Stables had been managed at Trentham, its employees being maintained at the Sutherland's expense. Up to 60 hunters were stabled at Trentham and a pack of 50 to 60 hounds were kennelled nearby. The hunt met 4 days of a week before the war. During wartime, the hunt continued to meet twice a week.
William Henry Jones, one of the 17 names, William Jones worked as a huntsman at Trentham for 4 years before the war, enlisting in 1915 at Stoke. He served in France in the Machine Gun Corps, Motor Branch. He was killed in action on the 3rd of September 1916 on the final day of the Battle of Delville Wood, a successful but costly phase of the Somme campaign.
Looking now at the land on this side of the road, there used to be another cottage opposite the Hunt Stables called Crown Cottage. Access was via 3 steps down from pavement level to the front door. Outside facilities included a 2-seater toilet and pigsty. Here lived the Furnivall family. Tom Furnivall was second huntsman to Comerity, the 4th Duke of Sutherland, his grace being number 1. Tom was an authority on horses, and during World War I, with his son Arthur, he broke in animals for the army remount depot at Butterton. The horses were brought from Canada and collected from Longport Station. The remount service provided 1.5 million horses during the course of the Great War.
The 2 black and white houses opposite here are the station house and ticket master's cottage, reminders of Trentham Park Station. Alongside, you can see the drive which led up to the station itself. The North Staffordshire Railway Company opened its Trentham Park branch line in 1910. It branched off the main line at Trentham Station, was carried over a bridge at Newin Lane and across to Trentham Park. The line became very popular with visitors.
Services were reduced during World War I, although it was used for ambulance trains as it was a gain in World War II. Wounded servicemen were transferred from special trains to convoys of ambulances which conveyed them to designated hospitals. The line played an important role in World War II when the clearing banks were relocated from London to Trentham Gardens. The close proximity of the station meant that huge volume of mail generated by the banks could be transported efficiently.
The line finally closed in 1957.
There were plans to extend the line round Newcastle-under-Lyme and on to Silverdale, and a bridge was built over the A34 in September 1914. But these plans were delayed by the Great War, and with the force of road competition, the scheme was abandoned in 1921 and 1923. The bridge was dismantled and sold for scrap in World War II. We're going to walk down Whitmore Road as far as the triangle of grass at the junction of Park Drive.
The kennels were built in the 1840s by the Marquis of Stafford, the eldest son of the 2nd Duke of Sutherland. In 1862, the North Staffordshire hunting hounds moved to Trentham and the kennels were enlarged to include lodgings. Foxhounds were accommodated on the ground floor, with sleeping accommodation for some of the hunt servants on the 1st floor. The former gamekeeper's cottage was taken over by the huntsman. The entrance was where Fairway is now. All the buildings have been demolished, except one cottage. The Duchess's Girls' School was opened in a pair of converted cottages around 1840. The school occupied one cottage while the schoolmistress lived in the other. In 1863, the school was moved to one of the cottages near the old bridge over the Trent. The NS Hunt took over the original girls' school. After the Hunt moved to Hill Chorlton in 1930, the cottages became private residences.
Here is a photo of the gas house, which is now in ruins. When Trentham Hall was rebuilt in the 1830s and 1840s, gas lighting was installed. The British Gas Company worked at Utrera, where too far away to serve Trentham Hall, so a private gas works was designed and built in a quarry which provided a ready-made enclosure for the gasometer.
This photo shows the ice house. The entrance is over the bank and to the left of the gas house. The ice house was built into the side of the old quarry in 1843 and described as an ice well on drawing plans. Its purpose was to store meat from the nearby slaughterhouse with ice collected from the lake, insulated with straw.
The blacksmith's shop on Park Drive is a peculiar triangle-shaped building with a tiny yard at the back. Originally built without a door, it had an open grille fixed into the horseshoe-shaped front and a large round segmented grille window at the rear. Flame shapes made from copper still stand at the top of the pillars. The last blacksmith to work here was Abraham Clay, who in 1912 lived at Ash Green Blacksmiths, were much in demand in World War I.
The fire engine house and cart shed were on the yard alongside the blacksmith's shop. The Duke had 2 horse-drawn steam fire engines and his own fire brigade at the hall, where fire was an ever-present danger. During World War I, there was also a very real threat from Zeppelin raids. On the night of the 31st of January 1916, 7 bombs were dropped from the Zeppelins on Sideway Colliery, without much damage. They were heading for Crewe and returned via the Black Country, where they did a considerable amount of damage. On the 27th of November 1916, bombs were dropped on the collieries between Fenton and Trentham. An unexploded dud was found at Blurton Waste Farm. Fortunately, no damage or injury was caused, but it must have been a terrifying experience.
Overlooking the yard was the Savoyer's house, home for many of years to Thomas Roberts, who was the estate architect from 1841 until his retirement, aged 81. Roberts was responsible for the maintenance of the buildings designed by Charles Barry and for numerous modifications to suit changing circumstances.
The Poulterer's house and adjacent buildings were erected in the 1840s and have survived relatively unchanged. The elaborate gardens in the south side, together with the fish stews, now form the church car park. Gardens on the north side have been developed for private housing.
The first section of the courtyard development is the former laundry. In 1914, laundry was no longer needed and the estate looked at either letting it or converting it to 3 cottages. The laundry is now private homes and the adjacent drying area has also been built over. The courtyard comprises estate buildings designed by Charles Barry with the appearance of a rural Italian courtyard. The front range was the home of the estate steward on one side, with the brewery and malt house on the other. The north and east sides of the yard were occupied by cow sheds, while the buildings in the centre were occupied by pigs. The central block containing the bailiff's office, the slaughterhouse, was at the rear of the courtyard. Herbert Challinor worked here. He was butcher to the Duke of Sutherland. His son, William Challinor, was killed on active service in France on the 3rd of September 1918 and is one of the 17 names on the War Memorial. The family lived at Park Cottage, Hanchurch, where William worked as a steamroller driver at this time of his enlistment.